The morning air was cool and crisp, carrying with it the earthy scent of freshly plowed soil. Alan Jacobs adjusted the brim of his weathered cap, his eyes fixed on the horizon where the towering hangars of Midland Airfield came into view. The drive had been long and quiet, save for the occasional hum of the tires on the cracked highway. Beside him, the battered pickup truck, a testament to years of hard labor, rattled and groaned with each turn of the wheel. He was dressed as he always was, a faded plaid shirt, mud-streaked work boots, and jeans that had seen one too many seasons. Alan was aware of how he looked. He wasn't ignorant to the assumptions people might make about him when they saw his calloused hands and weathered skin. But today, none of that mattered. Today, he was stepping into a world far removed from the one he knew. A world of polished marble floors, sleek aircraft, and dreams he'd carried since he was a young boy gazing at planes carving paths in the sky. The truck came to a halt outside the massive glass-fronted showroom. Alan sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel as if drawing strength from the rough texture beneath his fingers. "You've earned this," he murmured to himself, a quiet reminder that the years of toil under the unrelenting sun, the sacrifices, and the countless setbacks had all led to this moment. Sliding out of the driver's seat, Alan felt the crunch of gravel underfoot. He glanced down at his boots, their edges caked with dried mud from his fields. A pang of self-consciousness flared, but he quickly shoved it aside. With one steady breath, he strode toward the glass doors, his gait firm, each step echoing a silent defiance against doubt. Inside, the showroom was a cathedral of opulence. The floor gleamed like a mirror, reflecting the grandeur of the aircraft displayed within. Jets of all shapes and sizes stood proudly under the bright lights, their polished exteriors exuding an air of unattainable luxury. It was a world that seemed to belong to people who wore tailored suits and spoke in clipped, practiced tones. Alan's entrance did not go unnoticed. Heads turned, conversations paused mid-sentence, and the hum of the room seemed to momentarily falter. He could feel the weight of their stares, each one dissecting him, questioning his place in this pristine domain. Near the reception desk, a young woman in a sharp black dress leaned closer to her companion, her voice low but audible enough to carry. "Did he take a wrong turn? He looks like he belongs in a tractor." "Not here." A soft laugh followed, and Alan felt the heat rise in his chest. He ignored them, focusing instead on the jet that stood at the center of the showroom. Its sleek frame gleamed under the spotlights, and Alan's heart swelled at the sight of it. This wasn't just a machine, it was freedom, ambition, and the culmination of every ounce of effort he had poured into his life. As he approached the aircraft, he ran a hand over its cool metal surface, tracing the curves with reverence. It was surreal, standing so close to something that had once felt like an impossible dream. He let himself savor the moment, unaware of the approaching footsteps behind him. "Excuse me," a voice called, sharp and dripping with condescension. Alan turned to see a man in a tailored suit, his hair slicked back with precision. The name tag pinned to his lapel read Jake Miller, sales manager. Jake's gaze swept over Alan like he was an unsolved equation. "Can I help you?" "Yes," Alan replied evenly, meeting Jake's stare without flinching. "I'm here to inquire about purchasing this jet." Jake blinked, his carefully maintained composure faltering for just a second before a smirk crept onto his lips. "This one?" he asked, gesturing toward the jet with a flourish. "You're sure you're in the right place? These planes, they're not exactly affordable for everyone." Alan's jaw tightened, but he kept his tone steady. "I didn't ask if I could afford it. I said I wanted to purchase it." Jake chuckled, a sound that felt more like a jab than a laugh. "Well, let me save you some time. That plane starts at $6 million. But perhaps I could direct you to something a bit more reasonable." Alan didn't waver. "I'll be the judge of what's reasonable." The confidence in his voice seemed to throw Jake off balance for a moment. But the man quickly recovered, his smirk widening. "Of course, let me know if you have any other questions," he said before turning on his heel, his condescension trailing behind him like a shadow. Alan watched him go, his fists clenching at his sides. The murmur of whispers around the showroom grew louder, each snicker and sideways glance tightening the knot of frustration in his chest. Yet, he stood firm, his gaze returning to the jet. He wasn't here for their approval. He was here for his dream, and he wouldn't let anyone take that from him. Alan's hand rested on the polished fuselage of the jet, his rough fingertips tracing the cold, smooth metal. It was a stark contrast to the soil he was accustomed to. The longer he stood there, the more he felt the weight of the stairs pressing into his back. Each one was a silent question, a judgment he couldn't hear but could feel deeply. Near the reception area, Jake Miller joined a cluster of other sales staff, their whispers far from subtle. Alan could make out snippets, phrases like, "What's he doing here?" and "a farmer." Really? He breathed deeply, steadying himself. He dealt with worse, much worse. This was just another hurdle. As he moved to inspect the cockpit window, a loud voice pierced through the showroom. "I bet he doesn't even know how to fly one of these." The words came from a middle-aged man in an expensive navy suit. His arms crossed as he leaned against the counter near the coffee machine. His mocking tone drew laughter from a few others nearby. Alan turned his head slightly but didn't respond. He had no interest in engaging with them. No need to justify himself to people who judged him by his boots and his hands. Yet, the insult lingered, a bitter taste he couldn't quite swallow. He tried to refocus on the jet, its elegant design sparking something inside him, an old, unwavering dream. This wasn't about them. It never had been. It was about the hours spent tilling the land, the long nights balancing ledgers, the sacrifices he'd made to ensure that his children had opportunities he never had. This was about proving, not to others but to himself, that he belonged anywhere he chose to be. "Still here?" Jake's voice rang out again, breaking Alan's thoughts. He turned to see the salesman approaching him once more, his smirk firmly in place. "I thought maybe you'd realize this isn't exactly a place for browsing." "I'm not browsing," Alan replied, his voice even. "I'm here to buy." Jake's eyebrows shot up, the disbelief evident in his expression. "You're serious?" "Dead serious." Jake chuckled, shaking his head. "All right then, let's play along. Do you want me to show you the financing options? Or would you prefer we look at something smaller first? Maybe a used model?" "I don't need financing," Alan said firmly, his eyes locking onto Jake's. "And I'm not interested in a used model." For the first time, Jake faltered. There was no arrogance in Alan's tone, no boastful bragging. It was the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly what they wanted and wasn't asking for permission. Before Jake could muster a response, a new voice cut through the tension. "Alan Jacobs? Is that you?" Alan turned to see a man stepping through the showroom doors, his stride confident and his tailored suit fitting him like a glove. It was William Carter, his son. William's broad shoulders and piercing gaze immediately commanded attention, and the snickers and whispers around the room quieted as heads turned to watch. "William," Alan said, a rare smile breaking across his face. "I didn't expect you here so soon. I came as fast as I could." William replied, his voice warm but tinged with concern. He reached out and clasped Alan's hand firmly. "You all right?" "I'm fine," Alan said, "just looking." William's gaze swept the room, landing briefly on Jake, whose smirk had vanished. It was clear that the younger Carter carried himself with the authority of someone used to navigating these environments, a sharp contrast to Alan's humble demeanor. Jake cleared his throat, attempting to regain some semblance of control. "And you are William Carter," he said, his tone cool. "Attorney." Jake's eyes widened slightly, and the unease was unmistakable. "Ah, well, Mr. Carter, your father was just admiring one of our jets." "Admiring?" William repeated, his eyebrows raising. "My father isn't here to admire anything. He's here to buy." The weight of William's words settled over the room like a storm cloud. Jake shifted uncomfortably, his confidence clearly shaken. Of course," he stammered. "If you'll both excuse me for a moment. I'll fetch the details on the model he was looking at." As Jake hurried away, William turned to his father. "What's been going on here, Dad?" Alan hesitated. "It's nothing I can't handle." William's jaw tightened. "It's not nothing if they're disrespecting you." "What did he say?" Alan glanced toward the jet, then back at his son. "Nothing I haven't heard before." "That doesn't make it right," William said firmly. "You've worked too hard for this. Dad, they don't get to treat you like this." Alan placed a hand on William's shoulder, his grip steady. "Let it go, son. This isn't the fight I came here for." William's gaze softened slightly, but the fire in his eyes didn't fade. "Maybe it's not the fight you wanted, but it might be the one they need." The two men stood side by side, their contrasting appearances a silent testament to the journey they'd shared. As Alan turned back to the jet, William crossed his arms, his stance protective. Together, they waited, ready for whatever came next. The showroom's gleaming interior seemed unusually tense as William stood beside his father, his sharp gaze sweeping the room. Alan remained focused on the jet in front of him, his fingers brushing against its surface as if drawing strength from the cool metal. William, however, was less forgiving of the stares and whispers that continued to ripple through the space. Jake returned moments later, his movements stiff and mechanical as he approached the pair. In his hands was a sleek tablet, displaying the specifications and pricing for the jet Alan had been admiring. He cleared his throat before speaking, his voice lacking the confidence it held earlier. "Here are the details for this model," Jake began, holding out the tablet. "It's one of our top-tier options. Very high-end." William stepped forward, intercepting the tablet before Alan could reach for it. His sharp eyes scanned the information before nodding slightly and handing it to his father. "Looks good," William said, his tone neutral. "Do you have the purchase contract ready?" Jake blinked, caught off guard. "The purchase contract? That's what I said," William replied, his voice steady but firm. "You do have one prepared, don't you?" "Well, no, not yet," Jake stammered. "Usually, we, confirm the buyer's intentions first." Alan's gaze shifted to Jake, his expression calm but unyielding. "I thought I made my intentions clear." Jake swallowed hard, his discomfort palpable. "Yes, of course. I'll, get the paperwork started right away." As Jake hurried off, William turned to his father. "They're stalling, Dad." Alan nodded faintly. "I know." William's jaw tightened. "And you're letting them." Alan sighed, turning to face his son fully. "Listen, William, I've dealt with people like him my whole life. You can't teach them respect by shouting at them. You show them who you are. Let them see that nothing they say can shake you." William studied his father for a moment, his expression softening. "You're a better man than me, Dad." Alan chuckled, a rare sound that eased some of the tension between them. "Not better, just older." Before William could respond, a voice interrupted them. "Excuse me." They turned to see a woman in her late 20s approaching. Her uniform was identical to Jake's, but her demeanor was far different. She looked nervous, her hands clasped in front of her as she stopped a few steps away. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry for how you've been treated," she said, her voice quiet but sincere. "Not everyone here agrees with that kind of behavior." Alan regarded her carefully before nodding. "What's your name?" "Rachel," she replied, offering a hesitant smile. "Rachel Sanders." "Thank you, Rachel," Alan said, his voice warm. "It's good to know not everyone here sees the world the way Jake does." Rachel glanced over her shoulder, as if checking to make sure no one was watching. "If there's anything I can do to help, let me know." William stepped forward. "Actually, Rachel, there might be something you can do." Alan gave his son a questioning look, but William's expression was unreadable. "We'll talk later," he added, his tone decisive. Rachel nodded quickly before retreating. Alan and William continued to wait as Jake fumbled with the paperwork. More customers entered the showroom, their gazes flickering toward the pair with curiosity or thinly veiled disdain. Alan remained patient, but William's frustration was growing. Finally, Jake returned, holding a sheaf of papers. "Here's the initial contract," he said, placing it on the counter. "If you'd like to review it." William picked up the contract, scanning it quickly, his brow furrowed, and he looked up sharply. "What's this?" Jake shifted uncomfortably. "That's the standard agreement. This clause," William said, tapping the paper, "says you require a 50% non-refundable deposit before processing the order." "That's not standard." Jake hesitated, his discomfort growing. "Well, for high-value items like this, that's nonsense." William interrupted. "You don't impose conditions like this on your other clients, do you?" Jake's silence spoke volumes. Alan stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "If you don't want to sell me this plane, just say so. Don't hide behind your policies." Jake's mouth opened and closed a few times, but no words came out. The tension in the room was palpable, and even the other customers had stopped pretending not to listen. Before Jake could respond, William's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and nodded slightly. "Rachel sent me something," he said, stepping away to take the call. Alan watched his son go, a flicker of concern crossing his face. He turned back to Jake. His expression steady. "Finish the paperwork. No more games." Jake nodded reluctantly and disappeared into the back office. Alan stood alone, the silence of the room pressing down on him once again. When William returned, his expression was sharper, his movements more purposeful. "Dad," he said quietly, pulling Alan aside, "Rachel sent me a recording." "A recording?" Alan asked. "Of Jake and some of the others." William explained. "She's been documenting the way they treat customers like you. This isn't just about today. It's a pattern." Alan's brows furrowed. "Why would she do that?" William shrugged. "Maybe she's tired of watching people get treated unfairly. Either way, this changes everything." Alan nodded slowly, his mind racing. He didn't come here for a fight. But it seemed the fight had found him. "Let's finish this," he said, his voice resolute. Jake returned with the completed paperwork. His demeanor no longer as smug as before. The recording Rachel had sent to William lingered in the background like a shadow, though neither Alan nor William mentioned it yet. "Here's everything," Jake said, sliding the papers across the counter. "You can review it at your leisure." Alan picked up the contract, his eyes scanning the neatly printed lines. Jake shifted uncomfortably under the weight of the silence. But Alan's calm demeanor gave him no room to reassert his misplaced authority. William, standing beside his father, leaned in to glance at the documents. "Everything looks in order," Alan said quietly. He set the papers down and met Jake's gaze. "Now, tell me, why didn't you treat me like every other customer when I walked in here?" Jake blinked, caught off guard. I don't know what you mean," he stammered. "I think you do," Alan said, his voice low but steady. "You looked at me and decided I didn't belong. You weren't subtle about it either." The room fell silent, the other customers and staff turning to watch the exchange. Jake's face flushed a deep red. But he didn't respond. William stepped forward, his expression cold. "You should answer him," he said, "or maybe I should play the recording Rachel sent me. Let's hear how you and your colleagues talk about people like my father when you think no one's listening." Jake's eyes widened, and a ripple of shock spread through the room. "Recording?" he whispered. "That's right," William said, his tone sharp. "Rachel has been keeping track of everything. Every insult, every smirk, every underhanded comment. And now we have proof." Alan placed a hand on his son's shoulder, his gaze steady. "William, that's enough," he said softly. "But Dad, I didn't come here to fight," Alan said. "I came here to buy a plane. Let's focus on that." William hesitated but nodded, stepping back. Jake, still reeling from the revelation, quickly busied himself with finalizing the transaction. Alan signed the necessary documents, his hands steady despite the storm brewing around him. As Alan and William prepared to leave, a voice cut through the showroom. "So, you're actually buying that thing?" Alan turned to see a middle-aged man in a tailored gray suit standing near the coffee machine. His smirk was as sharp as the crease in his trousers. "Guess miracles do happen," the man added, his voice dripping with condescension. Alan didn't respond immediately, his gaze steady as he studied the man. "If you have something to say it plainly," he said at last. The man chuckled, folding his arms. "I'm just saying, people like you don't usually make it this far. Must have been a fluke." William took a step forward, his fists clenched, but Alan held up a hand to stop him. "You're right," Alan said, his voice calm. "People like me, people who work hard, save every penny, and refuse to give up, don't usually get this far. But here I am." The man's smirk faltered, but Alan didn't stop. "And do you know why? Because I don't let people like you tell me what I'm worth." The room was silent, the weight of Alan's words hanging heavy in the air. The man shifted uncomfortably, his bravado crumbling under the quiet strength of Alan's resolve. William smiled faintly, his pride evident. "Well said, Dad." Outside the showroom, William stopped his father before he could climb into the truck. "We can't let this go, Dad," he said, his tone serious. "They've been doing this to people for years. Rachel's recordings prove it." Alan sighed, leaning against the truck. "What do you want to do, son?" "File a lawsuit," William said firmly. "Hold them accountable, not just for you, but for everyone they've mistreated." Alan was silent for a long moment, his gaze distant. Finally, he nodded. "All right, let's do it." The decision marked the beginning of a new chapter in their fight, not just for Alan's dream but for justice itself. William wasted no time assembling a legal team. Rachel agreed to testify, and her recordings became the cornerstone of their case. The lawsuit was filed within weeks, and the news quickly spread, drawing attention from local media. Alan, meanwhile, returned to his farm, balancing his daily responsibilities with the emotional toll of the upcoming trial. Despite his quiet demeanor, he felt the weight of the fight they were undertaking. "Are you sure about this?" Alan's wife, Clara, asked one evening as they sat on the porch. "I'm sure," Alan said. "This isn't just about me. It's about showing them that people like us can't be pushed aside." Clara nodded, her hand resting on his. "Then I'll stand by you." The courtroom buzzed with energy as the first hearing began. Alan and William sat side by side, their presence a stark contrast to the polished legal team representing the showroom. Rachel testified first, her voice steady as she recounted the treatment she'd witnessed. When the recordings were played, the room fell silent. The mocking tones of Jake and others echoed through the courtroom, their words undeniable proof of the discrimination Alan had faced. The judge's expression was stern as she addressed the defense. "This is deeply troubling," she said. "I will not tolerate such behavior in my court." Alan felt a surge of hope as he glanced at William, who gave him a reassuring nod. They were just getting started. The following hearing saw the defense team attempt to counter the accusations. The showroom's lawyers argued that the discriminatory remarks made by their staff were isolated incidents, not reflective of the company's culture. "Your Honor," the lead attorney for the showroom, a stern-looking man named Victor Hayes, began, "we acknowledge that the comments made by certain employees were inappropriate. However, it is unfair to hold the company liable for the personal biases of individuals. The company cannot police every word spoken by its staff." William rose to his feet, his expression calm but firm. "Your Honor, this isn't about policing every word. This is about a pattern, a culture, of discrimination that has been allowed to thrive unchecked." The recordings provided by Ms. Rachel Sanders clearly demonstrate that these behaviors weren't isolated incidents. They were normalized. Victor interjected, his tone sharp. "One employee's testimony does not prove systemic issues." William didn't flinch. "That's why we have more than one witness." At his signal, a man in his late 30s stood and approached the witness stand. His name was Charles Grant, a former employee of the showroom. Charles had reached out after hearing about the case, eager to share his own experiences. Under William's questioning, Charles recounted how he had witnessed similar behavior during his time at the showroom. "It wasn't just Jake," Charles explained. "There were several employees who thought it was acceptable to mock customers based on how they looked or dressed. Management never did anything about it." The defense team's confidence began to waver as Charles's testimony reinforced Rachel's claims. The weight of evidence was growing, and the judge took note. Outside the courtroom, the pressure of the case spilled into Alan's personal life. Reporters gathered outside his farm, their questions relentless. Some local news outlets praised him for standing up against discrimination, while others painted him as a troublemaker stirring unnecessary conflict. One morning, Alan found graffiti scrawled across the side of his barn, "Stay in your place." His hands tightened into fists as he stared at the words, anger simmering beneath his calm exterior. When William arrived later that day, he found his father repainting the barn. "Who did this?" William demanded, his voice filled with fury. "Doesn't matter," Alan said, his strokes steady. "We've got bigger things to worry about." "It does matter," William argued. "This is exactly why we're fighting." Alan paused, his brush hovering over the wood. "And we'll win," he said, "but not by letting them distract us." William nodded, his respect for his father deepening. Together, they finished repainting the barn, the hateful message erased but not forgotten. The courtroom was packed for the next session, anticipation thick in the air. William stood at the front of the room, his presence commanding as he presented the recordings once again. This time, however, he paired the audio evidence with specific incidents logged by Rachel and Charles, creating a timeline of repeated misconduct. "Your Honor," William said, his voice resonant, "this isn't about one bad day or one bad employee. This is about a company that allowed discriminatory practices to flourish. It's about the humiliation my father endured and the message it sends to others who don't fit their narrow idea of what success looks like." The judge leaned forward, her expression thoughtful. "Mr. Carter, do you believe this case has broader implications beyond your father's experience?" "Yes, Your Honor, William replied, this case is about holding businesses accountable for the environments they foster. It's about ensuring that no one else has to face what my father did. Victor Hayes stood, his tone defensive. Your Honor, while the plaintiff's arguments are compelling, we must consider the impact this case could have on the defendant company. They have already implemented new training programs and disciplinary actions in response to these allegations. William countered immediately. After being caught, that's not proactive, it's reactive. And it doesn't erase the harm they've caused. The judge nodded slowly, her gaze shifting between the two sides. I'll take everything into consideration before delivering my judgment. Weeks later, the courtroom was packed once again as the judge prepared to announce her decision. Alan sat beside William, his hands resting on the polished wood of the bench. Clara sat behind them, her presence a quiet source of strength. The judge's voice was steady as she addressed the court. After reviewing the evidence and testimonies presented, it is clear that the defendant company failed to address a culture of discrimination within its establishment. The remarks and behaviors recorded were not isolated incidents but indicative of a larger issue. She paused, her gaze sweeping the room. As such, I find in favor of the plaintiff. The defendant company is ordered to pay $500 in damages to Mr. Alan Jacobs. Additionally, the company will implement mandatory anti-discrimination training for all employees, supervised by an independent organization. The room buzzed with murmurs as the judge continued. Furthermore, the company will issue a public apology to Mr. Jacobs, acknowledging their role in fostering an environment of disrespect. Alan exhaled slowly, a wave of relief washing over him. William placed a hand on his shoulder, his expression filled with quiet pride. They had done it. The public apology was published across major platforms, drawing widespread attention. The case became a turning point for the industry, sparking conversations about accountability and respect in business practices. Alan returned to the rival showroom he had visited earlier and finalized the purchase of his dream jet. The staff there treated him with the respect he deserved, their professionalism a stark contrast to what he had faced before. On the day of the delivery, Alan stood beside his family, watching as the sleek aircraft touched down on his property. The sight filled him with pride, not just for the plane, but for the journey that had led him there. As he climbed aboard for the first time, Alan looked out at the horizon, the vast expanse of sky symbolizing endless possibilities. He wasn't just a farmer with a dream anymore. He was a man who had proven that dignity and determination could soar higher than any prejudice. News of Alan Jacobs' legal victory spread far and wide, reaching places and people who felt unseen or silenced in their daily lives. Farmers, workers, and dreamers alike began sharing their own experiences of prejudice, discrimination, and doubt. Alan became a reluctant symbol of resilience and justice. Back at the farm, the attention brought a steady stream of visitors. Some came to congratulate Alan personally, while others sought advice on how to stand against their own struggles. Clara welcomed them warmly, always ensuring there was a fresh pot of coffee or a slice of her famous apple pie ready. One afternoon, a young man knocked on the door. He was in his early 20s, dressed in overalls and holding a notebook. Mr. Jacobs? He asked shyly when Alan opened the door. That's me, Alan replied, his tone inviting. My name's Henry. I just wanted to say thank you, the young man said, his voice trembling slightly. I work on my family's farm, and I've always felt like people don't take me seriously. Seeing what you did, it makes me believe I can do more. Alan smiled, placing a reassuring hand on Henry's shoulder. You can do anything, son. Just don't let anyone convince you otherwise. Henry left with a renewed sense of purpose, and Alan watched him go, feeling a spark of satisfaction. This, he realized, was what mattered most, showing others they could rise above the weight of doubt and discrimination. The rival aircraft showroom where Alan had purchased his plane saw a surge in business following the publicized events. Their respectful treatment of Alan stood as a stark contrast to the behavior of their competitors. And customers took notice. The owner of the rival company, a shrewd but fair man named Edward Kane, reached out to Alan directly. Mr. Jacobs, he said over the phone, his voice warm and professional. It would be an honor to have you as a guest at our annual aviation gala next month. Your story is one worth sharing. Alan hesitated. He wasn't used to public speaking or grand events, But William encouraged him. "Dad, this is your chance to show people who you really are. Not just a farmer, but a visionary." With Clara's gentle urging and William's unwavering support, Alan agreed. The aviation gala was a dazzling affair, held in a grand ballroom adorned with chandeliers and gleaming displays of the latest aircraft innovations. Alan, dressed in a sharp navy suit that Clara had helped him pick out, entered the room with William by his side. The crowd turned as whispers rippled through the room. Alan Jacobs, the farmer who had stood up against an entire system of prejudice, was here. Edward King greeted them warmly, introducing Alan to key figures in the aviation industry. Many expressed their admiration for his determination, while others seemed wary, unsure how to approach him. When it was time for Alan to speak, he stepped onto the stage, his heart pounding. He glanced at William, who gave him an encouraging nod. Alan took a deep breath and began. "I'm not a man of fancy words or big speeches," he said, his voice steady, "but I know what it feels like to be judged, underestimated, and told you don't belong. I know what it feels like to carry a dream so big it scares you. And I know what it feels like to finally make that dream come true." The room was silent, every eye on him. "I didn't fight for this plane just for myself," Alan continued. "I fought because I wanted to prove that no matter where you come from, no matter what you look like, you have the right to dream big, and the right to make those dreams a reality." Applause erupted as Alan stepped down, his chest swelling with pride. He had done more than share his story. He had inspired a room full of movers and shakers to think differently. Meanwhile, at the original showroom, the aftermath of the lawsuit brought sweeping changes. Jake Miller was terminated, his name now a symbol of arrogance and prejudice. The company underwent rigorous anti-discrimination training, with Rachel Sanders playing a key role in helping design and implement the program. Rachel herself received a promotion for her bravery in standing against her colleagues. "It was the right thing to do," she told a reporter who interviewed her. "Alan Jacobs showed me that standing up for what's right is always worth it." The showroom's new management made an effort to reach out to Alan, offering an apology and an invitation to return as a valued customer. Alan, however, declined. "Respect is earned, not bought," he told William when the offer was made. Years passed, and Alan's story became a case study in business ethics and a symbol of perseverance. His plane became a fixture at local airshows, where he shared his journey with audiences of all ages. Alan also used his newfound platform to support others in their battles against prejudice. He started a foundation, Dream Above, which provided scholarships to young people from underserved communities who aspired to careers in aviation and beyond. One day, as Alan stood beside his jet at a local event, he spotted Henry, the young farmer who had visited him years ago. Henry was now wearing a pilot's uniform, his eyes shining with pride. "Mr. Jacobs," he said, shaking Alan's hand, "I wanted you to be the first to know. I just got hired as a commercial pilot." Alan beamed. "I'm proud of you, Henry. You've earned it." Alan's story continued to resonate long after the lawsuit was settled and the jet was purchased. He remained a humble man, tending to his farm and cherishing time with his family. But he also carried with him the knowledge that he had made a difference, not just for himself, but for countless others. As he took to the skies in his jet, the horizon stretched endlessly before him, a symbol of the limitless potential he had always believed in. And for Alan Jacobs, the farmer who had defied the odds, the sky was just the beginning.